What's up, everybody? Welcome to Trail Tales. My name is Kyle O'Grady. I am your host. I am also a huge hiking nerd, and every single week on this podcast, I chat with other hiking nerds about their experiences on the trail. That's what we do here. You guys know that. I'm assuming you know that, right? So anyways, this week's guest is a man named Corey McMullen. He is probably my favorite Instagram photographer that I follow. He is based out of the White Mountains. He lives there, which is actually something we talk about a little bit towards the beginning of the episode, because I have this fantasy of just living in the Whites and just being a complete ultra hiking nerd, whatever. That would be really cool. But no, we talk about that a lot. We also just talk about photography, and don't worry, before you click away from the podcast or whatever, we don't really go too in depth on the technical stuff. So if you're not a photographer, I think you'll still enjoy this. We just talk about, how to motivate yourself to get the kinds of shots that you want to get, some of the process behind his creative process. It was really, really fun, and it's always good as somebody who's constantly trying to get better with a camera. It was really cool to kind of hear things from his perspective. So Corey, thank you so much for letting me slide into those DMs and getting you on the podcast. I really appreciate it. Let's do it again soon. Real quick, before we start the episode here, let me do my thing, my podcast thing. I got to plug, let's see, the Patreon. Please go check out the Patreon. Now, I know that not everyone wants to subscribe to something or give your credit card information and all that stuff. Dude, I get it, trust me. However, if you can get past that and you want to support Trail Tales on Patreon, that would be really, really appreciated. To be quite frank, that's just about the only thing that's keeping this podcast going. That makes it sound like I don't like the podcast. Okay, let me rephrase that. Financially, that is the only thing keeping the podcast going right now. I don't really make any money from this. I basically just use that money to finance, the hosting for the podcast and to pay my amazing editor who was a previous guest on the show. So yeah, if you listen every single week and you want to just ensure that I can continue to do these episodes, I would really appreciate it if you checked out the Patreon. It's patreon.com/trailtales. You'll get some bonus stuff as well. So I think it's pretty cool. So yeah, patreon.com/Trail Tales. I think I'm just going to leave it there, honestly. I think I'm just going to cut the intro there. We'll keep it nice and short this time. Let's get into it. Episode 99 with Corey McMullen. All right, here we go. Episode number 99 of Trail Tales. That's so crazy. Corey McMullen, what's up, man?
Hey, how's it going, Kyle?
It's going great. I really appreciate you doing this. For everybody listening, this is Corey's first podcast ever, which honestly, I'm a little bit surprised because you have a very strong presence on Instagram, particularly among, the White Mountains crowd, and fantastic photographer, everybody. So I think we're going to talk quite a bit about that stuff today. We're going to talk about the Whites and some other stuff too. So it's not all just going to be nerdy questions about aperture and shutter speed and stuff like that. But I might have to ask a couple of those, honestly, because,
you have to.
Because I'm a bit of a camera nerd, too, and I'm always trying to get better. So, with that said, Corey, thank you so much. Why don't you go ahead and just kind of introduce yourself? Let's start with hiking. So, how did you first get into hiking? And I'm honestly kind of curious to hear about living in the White Mountains as well. But let's start with just your introduction to hiking.
Sure. Geez, where to start?
I know, it's a very broad question.
I think I've mentioned this sort of story on Instagram before in one of my posts, but I grew up hiking. It wasn't anything obscene in terms of how often I went. I went with my dad and my sisters. We went up to the White Mountains actually every November-ish to do some winter camping. So I did that growing up, as well as every fall we had a timeshare, my family did, in Stowe, Vermont. So naturally, as a result, we would do a little bit of hiking while we spent time in Stowe and in the Whites. And it just sort of became a pattern. It became a part of my life. But at no point was it really an obsession or anything that I considered a passion at that time. And I always kept it on the back burner in my life. I did it now and then. It wasn't until about like 4 or 5 years ago now, I think. I was just going through some personal things in life, some challenges. Just got out of a long-term relationship, and I was kind of looking to get back to me and really start feeling for some passions that made me feel alive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in high school, I had taken a black and white film course and never really did anything with it, but I had borrowed my dad's old film camera during the time. And so a couple of friends and I were just looking to do something different, and I was looking for new passions at the time. So we started going up and hiking in the Whites and doing little hikes or Mount Monadnock or things like that.
Sure.
And it was soon after where I just started shooting more pictures on my dad's old film camera. I quickly realized how expensive film is and decided to, sure enough, just kind of go for it and invest money in a nice DSLR camera. Um, didn't really have any idea of direction with it. I just knew I enjoyed hiking and taking pictures along with it.
Okay.
And I had kind of briefly started looking at the 48 list in the Whites too. So it was kind of all brand new to me at the time in terms of, hiking as a passion and hiking on the regular and actually doing it because you enjoy the activity and not just doing it because you enjoy it as something you've done in your life.
Right, right.
Um, and before this time period, it was always just something I've done in my life, but never really like stuck to.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean.
So yeah, from there it kind of just spiraled. I got that camera and I just started without fail going up every single weekend. I had weekends off at the time from my job, and I went up every single weekend. I lived in Massachusetts, and I went up every single weekend to hike, and I found friends that actually through Instagram, believe it or not. I wasn't much of a social media person before this whole thing, and yeah, which was actually kind of a shocking bit to most
Yeah,
people,
right.
I think.
A little bit.
I had Facebook and that was it before this. And otherwise, I never really used social media.
Right, but it makes sense as a photographer. I mean, what better
Right.
medium to share your work than, or
Right.
at least the medium, that's going to reach the most people. So yeah, it makes sense for sure.
Yeah, and I started out just as a way to share the hikes I did and the photos I took, whether they be film or digital. And I got to talking with people on Instagram, other like-minded people that loved hiking, other people that enjoyed, hiking for photos. That's a thing too, is not just hiking, but hiking for photos.
Okay, okay.
Um, and sure enough, from there, like I said, it just kind of spiraled. There was one person in particular that I met. One of the first people I met on Instagram was Sterling Brooks Parsonen, you might have heard. And him and I very well connected in terms of what we enjoyed doing, and we ended up starting to sunrise hike almost every weekend. We would.
Nice.
He lived in Sunapee, New Hampshire, so it wasn't as much of a drive, but I lived in central Massachusetts, so it would be usually like a 3-hour drive one way, and we would drive up, and he might not always do it, but I would drive up on Friday night after work, and I would sleep in my car. Sunrise hike on Saturday. We would hang out during the day, Saturday after the hike, and sometimes we would do like a small sunset hike in the evening, Saturday, and then we would drive to the next trailhead. We would sleep in our cars and sunrise hike Sunday. And then after that, I would go home. So it kind of just became this thing that I did and did without fail. I think a lot of my friends and family at the time thought I was crazy because it was without fail every single weekend.
And then when did you finally make that leap to like move up there?
That wasn't until it was like 2.5 years into doing that like every single weekend.
Damn, dude, that's crazy. So you were pretty dedicated to just like getting up there all the time
Oh yeah,
before you even, moved yourself up there. That's awesome though, because, and the reason I ask about living there is just because I really want to live somewhere there too. It's a little bit more of a pipe dream. I'm not like
sure.
actively like doing anything to make it happen. So it's something I want to do eventually. So I like it. I like the fact that you were like, yo, I like this area. Like I'm going to live there and like make that happen. Can you kind of talk
hmm
about that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, a lot of the friends that I had at the time, whether they be through Instagram or otherwise, because we all did the same thing and hiked so much and so consistently, we were all like, what are we doing? Like, why aren't we living here?
Yeah, right.
So for those 2 years, it was quickly a pipe dream for me too. Um, I had at the time a fairly reliable and consistent and good job. So it was tough to like just walk away from that. A career for me has never really been, um, I don't know, everything for life to me, if that makes sense. It's never been my purpose in life,
Right, right.
or that fulfilling. So, I do what I need to with the job, but I also am somewhat realistic. So it was still tough to walk away from that kind of thing.
Right.
Um, so, and I knew up here in the Whites, it's mostly touristy. So finding a good job at that is few and far between, as well as most of the fields of work are revolved around tourism. So it was also, kind of making some sacrifices and maybe taking a job that wasn't as good or as up my alley. Um, but yeah, sure enough, I after I decided that I just couldn't do the driving anymore, it wasn't long. It took me uh, maybe 2.5 weeks to find an apartment
Oh,
and a
okay.
job.
That's not too
After I
bad.
No, after I fully decided that I was like, I'm
Committed.
doing this,
Yeah.
right? Um, so I made the jump, and I had moved around a bunch already before, so moving wasn't so much the issue at all. It was just more so, a change of pace, a change of lifestyle,
Right.
um, and let me know if I get off topic at all. I'm
Oh,
just
you're
kind of
good, man. You're good. That's the whole point here.
yeah. Yeah, so after that, I moved up and started off a job. I worked at the Omni Mount Washington Hotel up in Crawford Notch.
Classic.
Yep.
Classic.
I had worked in hospitality before, so it was pretty natural just to go back to that. Um, and I lived for hiking at that time.
Hmm.
When I once I made the move, it was a continuation of before when I was driving up here and that commitment. I worked at the time a mostly evenings job, and I would kind of do the same thing where I would work from like 2 p.m. until midnight or so. And then a lot of the times I would just drive straight to trailheads after my work shift and start hiking for
That's
sunrise.
crazy. You moved all the way up there and you're still sleeping at trailheads.
Yeah.
I mean,
No,
I
not
get it for the sunrise, obviously, but like
actually
that's funny.
not even sleeping. I would go right from work at ending at midnight and then just start hiking.
That's savage, dude. That's savage.
Yeah. It
That's
was it was hard to sustain, I'll
I
admit that.
I can imagine, but still, did you like find that after you kind of made the move and settled in and everything up there, that it was like as fulfilling as you had kind of hoped it was, or did you ever? I don't know. I don't want to like. I'm not saying like you would regret it or anything, but I don't know. I'm just kind of curious, like how it was after you kind of got there and the honeymoon of finally living in this place kind of
Sure.
wore off. And can you tell like I'm kind of like feeling this out for if I ever do something
Right.
crazy like this too? Like I don't know. I didn't really ask a question there, but do you kind of know what I'm
Yeah, no,
saying?
I think I get what you're saying.
Sure.
So I had actually made some friends that lived up here before I moved, and I had kind of, picked their brain at what it was like,
Hmm.
and a lot of them were saying that it was all that it was cracked up to be. And sure enough, it was for sure. I don't regret a single second of moving up here.
Hmm.
Honestly, this has been my favorite
Awesome.
place I've lived, period.
That's
And I've
badass.
lived in about 5 different places since college.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've heard at all from speculation of moving here, but there's definitely the idea that you can get complacent in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Once you live up here, like it's so easy to say, "Oh, I mean that mountain's out my door and all the time. I can do that whenever. I don't have to necessarily do that now." And I think I had a lot of drive and motivation prior to moving up here because I was kind of living a story in a way,
Yeah.
or living some sort of adventure, and it brought out a lot of excitement or anticipation of the excitement. And then once you move here, it's a little bit different. I mean, I would say I didn't lose that excitement or that anticipation of the excitement or that drive, but over time, like I definitely noticed differences.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously I didn't sleep at trailheads anymore because I lived within, 40 minutes of any mountain in the
Yeah,
Whites.
yeah.
But and I still, chased those sunrises or sunsets or what have you. But um, yeah, I mean, things changed a little bit, and I definitely didn't stop hiking, and I still haven't. But I definitely don't hike as often as I used to. Part of that's circumstantial, just because of jobs and
Yeah,
whatnot.
sure.
Here in the valley where I live in North Conway, a lot of people work and put a lot of effort into their work for all the peak seasons because it's tourism.
Yeah,
And
true.
you work hard, but then you get to play hard,
Yeah.
come the slow times of the year, you get to do what you want and really cherish that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I might have slowed down, but at the same time, I cherish it, because when that time comes around for me to, excuse me, when that time comes around for me to get to enjoy it and, things are slower in terms of tourism, I get to go out and enjoy my home.
Right, right. That's dude, you're doing a good job of selling me. Not that I was looking for someone to try to sell me because like I said, I've wanted to do this, but that's awesome. Kind of taking a step back when you were talking about how you like first started to get into hiking, it almost sounded to me like you kind of started to like really indulge yourself in hiking and photography at kind of the same time, like they kind of came up together. Is that a accurate assessment of what I heard there?
Yeah, I think I sort of mentioned, but like the investment into a camera was there was no end goal in mind or anything like that. I wasn't trying to chase a career at the time or anything like that. It was just me kind of clawing at finding different passions. And sure enough, I found out that these two things went so well together. Um, and I mean, it's pretty obvious to me because, well, when you get up in the mountains, there's so much to look at and so much to appreciate. So, being able to take pictures or nice pictures of it was just, I guess, a blessing
Mm-hmm.
or a way to really appreciate what you had.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, they came about together kind of at the same time, even though I'd been hiking all my life, and I'll always kind of consider myself a hiker first. Um, but the photography just kind of piggybacked and went parallel with it because of how well they fit together, at least for what I was doing.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Well, one of the reasons why I was so excited to have you on is because um, you can ask a million questions to like any photographer, right? And that stuff's valuable, but I always feel like it's a little bit more valuable when I talk to someone who's not only a photographer but someone who is a hiking photographer.
Hmm.
I feel like they just not that, again, because I've talked to plenty of people who aren't hikers that do photography and they've been able to help me, so I'm not just trying to throw them under the bus or whatever, but I just feel like I've always learned the most from talking to hiking photographers and from like actually practicing photography on trail. There's just something
Sure.
like and I don't know if you'll kind of agree with this, and not to compare my work to yours either, because there's really no comparison there, but it's just like, I don't know, there's just something about actually going through the motions and learning while you're actually, shooting in the conditions and in the places that you really like are focused on the hiking, when you're hiking, versus just going out in your backyard or whatever. So I don't know. I think I have a lot of photography questions, which is where I'm going here. This is a long-winded way of saying that. So one thing, another thing you had mentioned earlier is you said something about hiking for photos, which kind of stood out to me, because I feel like, because I think I kind of know what you mean, but I feel like people who maybe don't know much about photography or social media even might not know. I feel like most people know what you meant, but I don't know. Can you just explain that concept a little bit more? Because I think that's kind of interesting. Because, go for it.
Sure. So when I was driving to and from Massachusetts and lived down there, and I was meeting up with people and sunrise hiking, a lot of us were actually photographers. So we would all just go together, and it just worked so well because we all understand what we were there for. And we were all kind of chasing the same things. And that was oftentimes not only the experiences and, first and foremost, really the experience, but also for the photos. Especially when you sunrise or sunset hike, if you've ever done it, you know what it's like to kind of have those moments just scream at you in a way. For me, I've always tried to paint a picture in a way of what it's like, but for me, everything screams at me in those moments. And hiking for photos is, you see something that you like, and oftentimes it's those moments of the sun going down, or the alpenglow, or undercasts with the sun coming up, or any of those experiences, and you fall in love with also being able to capture it. And that's a very hard thing. And to this day, I don't consider myself great at it, because if you think about how long something like a sunrise lasts.
Yeah, you got to go quick, eh?
Yeah, I mean, when you're just hiking and you're looking out and experiencing it, and if you see the whole thing, you're on time up there to the mountain, it lasts a while. But when you're hiking and you're trying to both experience it and capture it in a camera, everything changes.
Yeah.
And it's such a internal battle too, is balancing enjoying that experience, but also trying to capture what you love. So hiking for photos sometimes is more leaning that scale to not the experience itself, which is kind of silly, but I'll admit it, I did it.
I don't think it's silly. I could see how people who don't understand photography could think it's silly, but when you have a passion for taking photos, at least from my experience, because this is something I've struggled with, just kind of trying to balance between living in the moment while you're actually out there and capturing good video or good photo or something. And I don't think that it necessarily, it's sure, it might take away from the hiking quote experience a little bit, but it's also another experience in and of itself if you find joy in using the camera. So I don't think it's necessarily, a bad thing, but I could see how other folks who aren't into cameras might think so, but sure. It is what it is.
They're cliches for a reason.
Yep.
But anyway, so the hiking for the photos is, you've fallen in love with these moments, whether it be for experience or for photos, and you naturally want to be able to capture it. You experience something and naturally you want to maybe tell your friends or tell your family, or be able to have some show, not for pride or anything like that, but have some show for what you able to experience and remember it. And for me, it's always been a big portion of being able to remember it by something.
Definitely.
And that something is, naturally, photos.
Definitely.
So hiking for photos is not only, maybe trying to quote unquote get that shot, but also being able to capture these moments that speak so loudly to us.
I'm just wondering how intentional hiking for photos is, right? Because I've and this kind of goes back to what we've been talking about here. It's like I've had times where, because let me back up just one step. I hiked a lot way before I ever started to care about cameras and photography and video and all this stuff. So I found that now that I do go out and I make videos of most of my backpacking trips at least, and I do, try to take photos and stuff like that. Sometimes I just wrestle with that. I'm like, maybe I'm tired, or I just don't feel like, using, or not even using the camera, but just really taking that like extra time to like make sure I get like the best shot possible. I might just be like, screw it. Like I'll just leave the aperture where it is. Like it looks fine on the screen. So whatever. So when you said hiking for photos, that made me think more of like, okay, in my mind, that's like just being very intentional, like before you even leave for the hike, being like, okay, I'm going out to capture these kinds of photos. I need to, bring this, and this equipment, I need to be up there at this time, if it's like a sunrise or sunset, something like that. And I don't know, I just think that's interesting because I really haven't done very much of that, and I think I probably should if I want to get better photos, because half the time I'll just go on a hike and I'll be like, oh yeah, I'll just bring my camera or whatever, and then I like hardly even end up using it because like it wasn't really a priority. So I kind of like the idea of prioritizing it like that, if that makes sense.
I mean, it totally depends from photographer to photographer. Some people do literally map out their shots and shots that they want in what position, and what they map out how they want to shoot it too. For me, it became a lot more about conditions, being able to capture certain conditions, and oftentimes that led to just hiking something over and over again until you get it right. You get those weather conditions right.
Interesting. Okay. So was it almost like you kind of envisioned a shot on a previous hike and was like, okay, if this and this were a little bit different, then I could get like a really good shot here, and so you would go back to the same spot?
Yeah, I mean,
that's awesome.
It's exactly that. You hike a mountain so many times, and maybe it's a favorite of yours, but you have a favorite portion or side of the mountain, and you imagine one day seeing an undercast sunrise in winter, where the alpenglow is good and the clouds are moving at a good clip, and imagining those conditions come all into play at once and being able to obtain that, not just for your experience but also in an image, is completely fulfilling.
Yeah, I bet. It just sounds awesome just hearing you describe it, because I've never been that intentional with my hiking photos at all. It's always like, like I said a second ago, just bring the camera and try to get some photos, I guess. And I just think that's cool, man. That's really cool.
I mean, again, it depends totally from photographer to photographer. Some people don't really have that intention. They just like to capture the moment, what they see, what they experience. I guess I was somewhat of a mixed in between. I liked just capturing what I saw, but now and then you love something so bad and you just want it so bad that you keep going at it until you get it. And that's probably why I've hiked the Prezzies 1,000,001 times over. You know? They just don't get old, and then the conditions in them to add on to that, they don't get old either.
Yeah, and plus you get to see them in all sorts of different like situations too, because that's kind of cool. Like just what you said there, and I'm not saying that like most people listening are like thinking this or anything, but I'm sure, there's always like a group of people that are like, oh, like I don't understand like why you'd want to like use all this technology and like spend all this time capturing photos. Like, why can't you just be in the moment or whatever? And listening to you describe, kind of trying to find those optimal conditions, I feel like in a way you almost like really get to know whatever that spot is in a really intimate way, like more so than someone who might just, go up randomly would. So that's, I really haven't thought about any of this stuff before. So that's pretty cool to hear. Can I ask you about capturing sunsets and sunrises?
Sure.
Because I see quite a bit of those on your page. They're awesome. And I will admit, I haven't really really tried to take any sunset photos. There's been a couple times where I just happened to stumble across one and I'll, try it, but I haven't really put that much thought into it. And from the few times I have, I always feel like I could never expose it well because I would either expose like, I don't know, it would be like really underexposed because the sun is so bright, or if
Right.
I try to get the actual like ground and stuff exposed well, then the sun is just way overblown. So I'm just kind of curious if you have any like tips or ideas about how to capture better, sunset, sunrise photos.
Um, I think as a general rule, it depends on the photographer you are. Some people are more landscape photographers and they want more of those minute details of the landscape, both, the sky and the foreground and everything in between. I've never been that person. While I do love to take landscape photos, I don't think I've ever really set up a tripod and on a mountain during sunrise and taken photos on it,
Mm-hmm.
unless it's like a backpacking trip and I'm trying to capture the stars or something like that.
Okay.
But for tips for photos, um, I mean, this is, I guess, depending on who you are and how much experience you have with a camera. Those times of day, you want the ISO as low as possible. Um, and then from there, it's all just like a balancing act. Um, if you're trying to include a person in it and you want the foreground blurred, but you want the person fairly sharp, then you have to play with what aperture you want your settings at. If you want some blur, you could put it at anywhere between like f2.8 to f4. But I don't know if I'm getting at what you're trying to
No,
ask,
you
but
are. You are for sure. It
okay,
was more of a technically, directed question.
sure.
But I mean, I know there's more to it than just the
Yeah,
knobs
I
and
mean,
dials and stuff too.
like I said, it's really a balancing act between, your ISO, your shutter speed, and your aperture, and also what you want out of the photo. If you're just shooting a landscape and you're just trying to get as much detail as possible, then you're obviously going to prioritize aperture, and then from there you can bump up your ISO to meet your standards. If it's still really dark, like in blue hour, for example, before the sun's up, then you're going to really have to either put your camera on a tripod or be comfortable doing handheld exposures at really slow shutters.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's a tough thing too, is because, if you're on the move during sunrise and you're trying to get to the summit or to a certain point on the mountain, it can be tough to balance, you know, being still enough where you can set up your exposure and set up your settings and then move on before you get to where you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what other tips I have.
I'm sure
It's
it
funny.
comes pretty natural by now too if you've done it so many
Yeah, I
times.
mean, back when I was first learning on a digital camera, I had to think about everything I did. And oftentimes I felt like I was just missing every single shot because I was too slow to set my settings and
Mm-hmm.
like think about what I needed to do. So often at times I was just running and gunning and shooting blindly.
Right.
But I think that's also what ultimately ended up to me learning. Um, let's see. I mean, definitely the wider the lens that you have, the easier it is to capture, low light because, well, you can allow more light into the lens.
Right. Right. But see,
And it,
actually, I kind of have a question about that because
sure, yeah,
on one hand, it's like I get that, like the wider the aperture, the more light comes in. But on the
yep,
other hand, I also hear like when you're shooting a landscape, you want like everything to be in focus, so you don't want to go like all the way wide or whatever. Um,
yeah.
can you? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, that's kind of all in what you want out of the photo again. Um, when you're shooting low light, like at sunrise or for sunset, where the light's really getting low, um, it's pretty tough to be able to achieve that unless you set up a tripod
Mm-hmm.
to be able to get all the details in and do a shot like f22
Gotcha.
or around that, because that really sets the camera pretty dark, and to be able to achieve that you would need a really slow shutter speed or to to really yank up the ISO.
Right.
And if you're shooting landscapes with good light, you usually don't want to put the ISO that high. So yeah, I mean, it's really difficult to achieve that kind of thing unless you set up a tripod. For me, it's not about Ben getting all the detail, but rather being able to like have the photo draw you in.
Yep.
And oftentimes for me, that's shooting at a pretty low aperture of, anywhere from f2.8 again to about like f5.6 or 6.7 or something like that. Because really, I like that balance of like a little bit of blur, but also a good amount of detail in the middle ground. So it really is what you prefer. If you are trying to get as much detail and you're really trying to get a solid landscape photo, often that's setting up a tripod. And if you have the temperament for that, to be able to, slow way down and really take your time, then that's for you. For me, it's never been that.
I got you. One thing I got to ask about is the portraits, because, we're talking about landscapes a little bit here, but some of the photos that really jump out to me, I'm actually looking at your Instagram right now, are the ones of people. And this is something I'm very interested in because, I like to post photos of myself, honestly.
Sure.
And I like to take photos of the people I'm with and stuff too, although I don't post them quite as much. But anyways, such a general open question, but I'm just curious to know your process behind capturing the portraits of people, and not even like the, where there's just one person. I see lots of photos here with multiple people, and they always just look so natural, right? So I'm kind of curious how you go about capturing people when they're hiking in such a natural way, because I feel like a lot of the times when I try to do it, I just end up posing, or it just looks kind of staged and kind of corny. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I think I'll start with one point, but I'm going to bring up a second point after.
Sure.
First is I definitely do hike with a lot of photographers.
Yeah, I guess that would help.
That being said, photographers just have a natural way of knowing when like a camera's on them or like how to be around them. Not to say that photographers are really good at like posing or really good in front of a camera. It's just they have a certain comfortability in front of one. So as a result, it becomes that much easier being able to capture a portrait of a photographer or people who have been around a camera a lot, because they're just comfortable, and they don't feel posed or like they have to pose. It's just there. It's just a part of it. So that's one point. The second point is, I think I've always tried to, as much as, or as busy as those moments are when the sun's coming up or the clouds are shifting around you, those are really busy and hectic moments, but people tend to, at least people that enjoy those kind of things, people tend to light up. They just naturally light up in those moments. And I'm speaking of people that really enjoy chasing those kind of moments. People just light up. And I think that as a result becomes a pretty natural experience and natural emotion. And I think one thing I've tried to do is capture people broadening their experiences and experiencing new things for the first times, or, for a person seeing their first undercast sunrise or a first sunrise in general on a mountain. It's a pretty special kind of moment.
Yeah.
So not necessarily asking to someone to go pose over by this ledge or whatnot, and I do plenty of that, but just watching them. And oftentimes, like, again, it's that internal battle between getting the experience and doing the photography. But to be able to capture these natural moments, oftentimes you're not living in your own experience. You're living in the experience of the people that you're hiking with. because you're constantly watching for that perfect moment to take a photo.
Yeah.
Um, so it's really just like a watching and being observant game, is be able to watch what your friends are doing. Um, and it's hard because you're trying to also hike for one.
Yeah, yeah.
And if it's at all like a technical trail or anything like that, it can be hard to be trying to hike and keep up with them or get to a certain vantage point, and also watching them to see how the mountains or the moment affects them.
Hmm.
And this is something I definitely struggle with still. As much as I might try to do it and show it on Instagram, it's a struggle. I still struggle with it to this day.
Well, it doesn't look like it because your photos are freaking awesome, dude.
Thanks.
Especially I mean, all of them, but especially the portraits. I mean, like I said,
I appreciate that.
those are some of the ones that have jumped out to me, and I definitely understand what you're saying about just being comfortable in front of the camera.
Yeah.
It's like I'm still like trying to figure out a good way, because I do have to be a little bit intentional with my photos when I'm hiking with somebody else, usually my friend Flossie, who most of the audience is familiar with at this point. He's been on a couple times. But it's like always a balance between, not trying to stage it too much, but also being like, hey, can you take my camera and I'm going to like hike up to you and just take a bunch of photos. Basically, that's usually like what I end up doing. And half the time it works okay, and half the time it just is not. Just I don't know. It's tough. It's definitely tough to capture like natural looking photos of people without just posing them essentially. So I admire it.
I don't want to steer any of my audience wrong. I do plenty of that too.
Okay, well, can you talk about the posing a little bit then?
Sure.
Any techniques or tips I should think about?
I mean, it goes back to that being comfortable portion again,
Mm-hmm.
because if you're not comfortable, you're not going to do what you would naturally.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's as simple as something like
That's a
hiking
really
up
good point.
this portion of the trail. If you're not comfortable in front of a camera, then you're going to be aware, and that's going to change your body language. So, again, even if it's as simple as hiking up a little section of the trail, if you're comfortable, you're going to hike that as you would hike that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not comfortable, you're going to hike that as you would hike it, but your body's going to tense up and your body's going to change the way it might do things.
Mm-hmm.
That's just what I've observed
Yeah,
anyway.
no, it makes perfect sense for sure.
So in that, I think what you were asking is like about staging is just, even if you do ask people to do something like that, it's important to try and make them feel comfortable. And even if I do like portrait sessions of a person or a family, like not on a mountain, like this is the exact thing that I strive for, is getting them to feel comfortable and natural, like they're just doing what they would normally.
Mm-hmm.
And that just helps them, if you're able to achieve it anyway, to just do things as they would normally. And that's what makes for the best photos that I've at least observed.
Nice. Yeah, it's definitely a balance. Something I'm still practicing and getting better at. How about shooting in the winter specifically? So I had sent you that message the other day asking about protecting your camera, and it's kind of got me thinking about taking photos in the winter, because that was really the first time I'd ever brought my camera out in winter conditions, because I'm honestly not much of a winter hiker until this year, hopefully. But anyways, so obviously it's got to be harder in the winter, right? Like you're cold, you're wearing gloves, like you're trying to protect your camera, all this stuff. I guess, I mean, there's a question in all of those points there, but let's start with just the motivation of even just bringing yourself to like use the camera as much as you would otherwise when it's cold out like that. Because even on the one hike I did last weekend, when I had the camera, the higher I got and like the colder it got, the less likely I was going to take out the camera, the less inclined I was to take out the camera, even though I knew I had to, like I was making a video that people are expecting and stuff. So can you just talk about finding the motivation, or just any ways to make your workflow as easy as possible when the conditions are cold like that?
Sure. Well, for one, I'll just say first off that winter is my favorite hiking season. So it's hard not to just be in love with every moment that I'm out there.
Hmm. That's
And
awesome.
that's both, I would say, as a photographer and a hiker, is winter's my favorite hiking or my favorite season. So it is hard. It really is. And again, I'll probably keep going back to this point is it's all a balancing act. Oftentimes in winter, you're going a lot slower as a result to be able to achieve both the hike itself. Maybe if it's for sunrise, then you're going a lot slower because of the conditions.
Hmm.
But also, it takes more time adding in that extra photo aspect, especially in winter.
Oh yeah.
Um, I think one thing I've done, at least to save myself, is I've learned to hike with my camera around my shoulder, just with my strap. A lot of people have messaged me asking what's a solution to not do that. And I've pretty much told them to do it.
Yeah.
And the reason is not just in winter, but like if you want to be a photographer that hikes or a hiker that shoots photos, you have to be able to be like Johnny on the spot and
Yeah.
be able to grab your camera and lift it up and shoot. Um, and so I've just gotten used to that. In winter, I'll tend to keep, if it's a sunrise hike anyway, I'll tend to keep my camera in my pack up until it starts getting to close to blue hour or where we start getting close to the top.
Hmm.
This just saves my camera from added on exposure to the elements that it doesn't need, especially if there's, snow on the trees and you're constantly, brushing up against the trees and the snow's then getting on your camera, those things.
Yeah.
But I'll also always have liner gloves on. Even if it's really cold, I'll have liner gloves on and then a form of a shell glove, whether it's a full-on winter glove or just a shell. Um, and that allows me to better handle my camera. My hands actually have really bad circulation, so it's a battle I fully understand is being able to expose your hands to the cold and shoot photos when everything else is already cold.
Yeah.
But I think it's a battle I've gotten kind of used to. And you take out your hands or you take out your hands out of the gloves as long as you can, and then you put them back in. One trick I've learned, not just for photos, but also for hiking, is if you're doing a really cold hike, before you even put like your big gloves on, you keep them in your pack and you put hand warmers in them
Ooh, there you
as you're
go.
starting the hike.
That's a good idea. I've never thought
Um,
about that.
that's just something I've done because if you think about it, if you start out with your liner gloves and you're hiking up and it's getting colder as you're hiking up, when you need those big gloves, you usually really need them. I mean,
Hmm.
for most people at least, or at least just for me, um, the cold kind of sets in really fast usually,
Yeah.
and it goes one moment from your hands just being good and moving along to the next moment of wow, my hands are actually almost numb. So when you need those big gloves, you need them, and so I've stuck hand warmers in them already and they're inside my pack ready to go.
Gotcha.
um, and then I don't know how many people use those little loops around their big gloves, but I always attach them to my wrist when I'm shooting photos because when I'm able to take that big glove off and just have the liner, I don't want to mess with holding that big glove. So I just, take it off my hand and
Just
then
let
let
it
it
dangle.
drop.
Yeah.
Right. So that just saves me extra time and, use of my
That's
hands.
not a bad idea at all. I gotcha. I
Um,
gotcha.
and again, steer me along the path if I'm not getting at your question
No, you're
right.
good,
But
man. You're good.
um, yeah, I mean, it's little tips and tricks like that that I've learned that work for me. I think kind of the biggest thing is being able to be comfortable with who you're hiking with is a huge thing because not just from like a safety aspect of like general hiking and being able to be out in that cold, whatever the temps are, and making good decisions. But being able to be comfortable with who you're hiking with and know each other's pace is another helpful thing,
Mm-hmm.
because when you're taking photos and you're slowing down constantly or speeding up, it's just a good idea to be able to know how the person that you're with hikes, because if you do know them, then you know how often they take breaks, when they usually take breaks, and you're able to kind of anticipate like how your body needs to move along with it. And that's just as a general thing, like kind of helped me be able to also anticipate, like, well, especially if I've hiked this mountain before, when do I want to take my camera out and take photos? You know, do I need to like put up a lot of my energy reserves for the beginning or the end, or, and as a result, I might like take a slower start to my hike
Mm-hmm.
and then save a lot of my energy for the end when I know I have to speed up and probably move faster than them to take the photos that I want.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah. I feel like at the end of the day, I just need to go do it more too. Just like
Yeah,
get out there
yeah.
more and experience more in the winter and stuff. Um,
One thing I'll if you don't
sure. Oh
mind,
yeah, go for it.
in no way is this like me yanking my own chain at all, because I'm often not in shape. But there's a saying out there for photographers that hike, or are in the mountains, that if you're not in shape, you're not going to get the shot.
Yeah, I can definitely see that being the case.
And it's a thing I struggle with too, is like being able to not only keep up with the people that you're hiking with, but often like be able to hike faster than them if you're trying to get a certain shot,
Yeah,
you
because
know?
you'd have to like get ahead of them to like frame it and things like that. I'm
Right.
guessing.
Because depending on the person that you're hiking with too, like they might not always like want to stop all the
Yeah,
time and
which
get their
is
photo
reasonable.
taken.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to do it on the fly. And that's just one thing I've learned is, or especially heard in the mountains from other fellow photographers, is that if you want to get the shot, you kind of have to be able to be in shape.
Yeah. Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. Um, I hate to ask this next question because I'm sure you've had plenty of people DM you this, but I gotta ask. Okay, so like your photos are just like so sharp and crisp, and that's something I have struggled with a little bit. I've gotten there sometimes where I get a photo that I'm satisfied with, but not consistently. So I'm just curious, like, I don't know if it's while you're actually shooting or even if it's like post processing. I'm just
Yep.
curious how like you get it so sharp, and yeah, crisp like that.
Um, hmm. I
What's the
mean,
secret? What's the secret?
I think one of the major things is whether or not you shoot in RAW format versus JPEG.
Right.
If you shoot in JPEG, a lot of the sharpening that might take place takes place in the camera body, and that's just not as higher quality of sharpness that you want, or higher quality of image that you want. Shooting in RAW allows you to really change the image and have a lot more control of the image, so you're able to most times get that sharpness that you might want,
Hmm.
and the details just are that much higher quality. So that would be my first point: is if you're not shooting in RAW format, switch to RAW format. Um, that would be the biggest thing.
Hmm.
Um, Outside of that, it probably has to do with a lot of post processing. I'll be fully honest with you. I don't come from a background of photography, so a lot of like technical terms and technical post processing things I'm still learning.
Really?
Yeah,
I would
yeah,
not have guessed that based on your feed, because it all looks great, and not just the sharpness either, but just like the colors and everything too. Do you use Lightroom, I'm assuming?
yeah, yeah. I use Lightroom. Um, I mean, I've pretty much learned from, having fellow friends that are photographers and being able to pick up little things from them and talking with them. But I've also just learned by kind of teaching myself and trial and error. Um, so it was something I used to struggle with a lot more than I probably do now. But I used to really hate post-processing because I knew I wasn't good at it and that I didn't have the knowledge base or the education to be able to do it.
Hmm.
So it was always something that I hated more than anything. Um, Now I've gotten definitely more comfortable with it, and I have a little bit of the know-how, but I definitely don't have a technical background or anything like that.
Well,
Um,
whatever you're doing, it's working. So
I'm glad to
keep
hear
it
it.
up, man. Dude, do you have a story for the end of the episode, like I told you before, and then forgot to remind you about? um,
Yeah,
Trail Tales. So yeah, I always have somebody share a story at the end here. And it doesn't have to just be a photography story. It could be any crazy or whatever story from your time in the mountains.
sure.
Do you have something?
I mean, I have a lot of stories and memories. I think if I'm to choose one, it would have to be this one time that I did Mount Adams for sunrise in the winter. It was 2 winters ago. And me and my friend Jack had tried to get sunrise up there before, and we failed miserably because about halfway up before the Alpine zone, the trail just pretty much stopped under 2 feet of snow because the person that had come before, they just decided to give up breaking trail.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were going up Airline Trail, which some of you might be familiar about. And about probably a little less than 2 miles in, and the trail went cold, and we still decided to, for whatever reason, continue on. I don't think we really knew that we were going to make it by any means, and I think it was kind of like an unspoken thing that we both knew we weren't going to make it, but we just carried on and kept at it.
Mm-hmm.
We got to tree line pretty much as the sun was starting to poke out, and that was way behind schedule because for people that have done Adams via airline, once you get above tree line, even though it's not that far distance wise, like on paper, it's a lot of exposed like time above tree line, and
Yeah.
it
Oh
takes
yeah.
quite a while. So that was just, and maybe the way I told it isn't anything to write home about, but that morning especially always sticks with me because of just the way it progressed. I mean, it was that morning at the trailhead, it was sub like teens to start.
Dude, that's so intense,
So it
honestly.
was already just a brutal morning in winter, to start at like 2 a.m. and it already be negative teens. So just the way that day went, and then we got about halfway up, and the trail was unbroken, and it was up to our knees in some places, and we just kept going. And I think when we got above tree line, it was just clear on both my friend Jack and my face, like how completely beaten down we were,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, just through that entire experience. But we walked out of it, and we went up part way. We didn't end up summiting that day just because of everything we went through, but
Yeah.
um, we ended up, went up to a stopping point where we could at least enjoy the view and hang out for a little while before going down. And we both basically just laid down on the mountain and laid there for a minute because we were
So
completely
intense.
defeated. Um, and the goal was not necessarily just for photos, but to be able to be on or close to the summit of Adams by sunrise.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know. Just the experience itself was pretty humbling, not only, but also pretty motivating too, because later that winter we went back and we made it
And
happen.
you got it. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Hell
So
yeah.
those kind of experiences for me are pretty memorable and important, even though we didn't make the summit and we got pretty much shut down. Um, it's just that kind of experience that makes you like appreciate the times that you do get to where you want to be, or all the good days that you have on the
Oh yeah.
mountains. And by all means, I consider that a good day, even though it was completely miserable in a lot of senses
I
of the
bet.
word. But I think the type 2 fun experience pretty much describes that kind of morning.
I think it's something that just about everybody listening to the show is probably familiar with at this point. So
yeah.
Makes a lot of sense, dude. Adams in the winter, that's some intense shit. I want to get over there. Maybe not to Adams specifically, but somewhere over in the Whites this winter, because I've never really ever hiked there. I did one hike, and I did Cabot in early December one time, but it wasn't quite the same. So,
well, I'll say it: the Whites in the winter are not unlike anything else.
That's what I've heard.
I think there's a reason that they're called the Whites.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, shit, dude, I am looking forward to getting over there. So, hey, dude, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for letting me pick your brain about photography and living in North Conway and all this stuff. I really appreciate you coming on here.
Sure thing, Kyle. I appreciate you inviting me.
Of course. Go ahead, plug your Instagram or anything else you want to plug. Everybody, I'm telling you, if you hike in the Whites a lot and you like photography based in the Whites, like, you gotta follow Corey. Even if you just like hiking photography in general, you've never been to New Hampshire before, still gotta follow him. It's such an amazing page. He's such a good photographer. Obviously, I've been hyping him up this whole time. So yeah, dude, what's your Insta? Go ahead, plug it.
So the Instagram is at Corey Outdoors, Corey Outdoors, and follow along there, and hope we can connect.
Awesome, man. I will have a link to his Instagram in the show notes as usual. That's going to do it. Episode 99 is over. Just one more till 100. Thank you for listening, everybody. And Corey, thank you again one more time. Have a good one,
Thanks,
everybody.
Kyle. Have a good night.